Well, I see somebody else in the comments already talking about it, and it is the next thing on the docket as well. Kurt Golson says, just joined, but I'm so in on getting Castle. We're going to talk about him a little bit later. Worried he's going to be gone. But this was what I was referring to for our next topic. Really like the idea of Garland, too. And the reason we bring this up is because the Cleveland Cavaliers were eliminated in 5 games by the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference semifinals. And since then, there's been a lot of talk about Donovan Mitchell. There's been a lot of talk about Darius Garland. And probably one of the tweets or posts, on whatever social media you use that you've seen floating around is that there were some odds put out for where Darius Garland could end up if it's not in Cleveland next year. And of course, all these odds are plus odds, but the lowest odds or highest odds, it's the lowest plus number is what I mean, but the most likely team odds-wise on the list that he could potentially go to was the San Antonio Spurs. And Ethan, this ties into a theme that we even opened the episode up with. Like, there's just so much more water cooler talk, scenario, stuff like this with Victor. And it almost feels like whatever, free agent, because we've heard a ton of smoke about his teammate, Donovan Mitchell, too, but whatever point guard that could potentially be on the market, as long as that's a need for the Spurs until they address that, it just kind of feels like we're going to be in that conversation. I don't want to delegitimize the chance of this happening, but it just I'm not sure how much credence to give to it personally. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it feels a lot like the Trae Young discussion did at the very beginning of that trade rumor. I remember everyone was in on it, even you and me to an extent. We're like, it makes sense. Just to speak to Darius Garland, like I know he's a small point guard. Like if you want to talk about weaknesses, you could say maybe defense, even though I think he's definitely better than Trae Young on that side of the ball. But he's still a smaller guard. He can be a prolific scorer. He's a very nice passer. Career highs were a couple years ago with 22 points, 9 assists on efficient shooting. He struggled this year a little bit next to Donovan Mitchell. Obviously, he had struggles in the playoffs. So how much credence does it have? I'm not sure. Like, I don't think a lot because I still feel like the Spurs are going to stay pat, at least for the foreseeable future on the whole build through the draft, slowly build with this team, and then maybe trade at either this deadline or next offseason. I still don't see it happening this offseason, but it's interesting because I feel like Cleveland more so than Atlanta is willing and able to make a move, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Especially now.
Yeah, and they're kind of in they're at a point in their franchise where, like, regardless of if they move Garland or D Mitch, like they've got still like a solid core around that. And if they move one of those guys, they're gonna get something in return. Like they're still gonna have Jared Allen, they're still gonna have Evan Mobley, they're still gonna have Isaac Okoro. I know he's not a crazy player, but still a young player, who hasn't reached his ceiling. We'll see how long Karis LeVert's around there. He's a solid role player. Maybe he's somebody that could get moved. But as much as the Hawks just got the number 1 pick and it's a chance for them to reset too, the Cleveland doesn't have the number 1 pick. You know what I mean? And I think they've kind of realized their ceiling where the Hawks might feel like they can still unlock some stuff. It is similar situations. Like as I'm talking, I'm kind of realizing that. But for some, I don't know. Do you get what I'm getting at there, Ethan? With Cleveland just seeming a little bit more realistic.
For sure, I do. But the more I think about it too, like I'm trying to think about this from Cleveland's perspective, and they're not exactly an old team. Like Jared Allen, probably their oldest like solid player, but everyone else is pretty young. Like Darius is only 24. Donovan Mitchell is what, 25, 26 maybe. Evan Mobley is very young. I feel like they think that their young players would have accelerated a little more quickly. And that's why they made the move to bring Donovan Mitchell in, and they
Mitchell's 27, just to confirm.
He's 27. I think they overestimated how quickly Evan Mobley would adjust and become an all-star level player. He's kind of been disappointing the last couple of years. You could say the same thing about Isaac Okoro, even though I think he's a really solid piece. Maybe they thought he would become more of a star, where he's looking more like a very good role player. So they're in a tough spot. I don't know what their cap situation looks like, but just to role play this real quick, If
Go
it's going
ahead.
to cost us Keldon Johnson, Malachi Branham, maybe 2 firsts, and we get Darius Garland, and they keep Donovan Mitchell, how does that solve anything for Cleveland other than the fact that they move off of Darius Garland? Like I feel like they would want more, and if they're going to depend on picks, and I know they don't want to pay Garland necessarily, but if they're going to depend on our
They
picks,
have paid Garland. He's on a 5-year
yeah, but I'm
solid
saying to kind of
contract.
get off of his
Oh,
contract,
yeah,
that's
yeah. Okay, I got you. I got you. My
dump
bad.
it to us. Um, like I don't know if us giving them 2 first-round picks, Keldon Johnson and Malachi Branham, solves their issues now. Do you know what I mean? Like
No, completely.
if they make that trade, I feel like they also have to trade Donovan and just start from the bottom up and rebuild around Evan Mobley and just give him a little bit more time.
When well, here, let's see what Kirk's comment says right here. Seems like Garland's camp is saying if they sign Mitchell, he's demanding a trade, so they may not have that much leverage. I'm not sure. I'm not trying to say you're wrong, Kirk, but I'm not sure where you got that from. I'm sure there's some legitimacy
I
floating
think
around.
Paul is around there, yeah.
Yeah, floating around about that, and I can see that because of kind of the fit this season. Um, but I mean, honestly, I mean, if I'm looking at it from Cleveland's perspective, I mean, yeah, I don't. I feel like there's a better move for them than Malachi and Keldon that they could get, instead of for Garland. But the other thing, honestly, like, and maybe I'm crazy here, I kind of think they should move Donovan and
I,
just
I was thinking the same
roll with the young core because I mean I'm not trying to say that Garland doesn't have his deficiencies, but you saw in the games where Donovan was out. He had some 30-point games in the playoffs, didn't struggle as much, with having more freedom with the ball. And Ethan, do you remember when he gave us 50? I can't remember which year that was, but that was pretty recently. Like, I
Yeah,
mean, it's kind of funny because that's where my memories stick to him. Like, he goes off against us, you know? And then now you've kind of see it's been interesting to watch kind of through the playoffs and also just with the addition of Donovan Mitchell, how that just it's kind of similar to Trae Young and DeJounte in a
yeah.
sense that they're just both, kind of ball dominant players. As much as Donovan is a two, he takes the ball up a ton. Um,
He's an undersized too.
yeah, and not to just go on forever about the Cavs, but that's kind of I don't as we started this conversation, Ethan, it's just kind of like I'm not sure how much legitimacy there is to this or if there's really a percentage chance of this happening. It's just if we're going to make an odds list for Darius Garland, it kind of makes sense for the Spurs to be on there. And that would be the same thing for Tyrese Maxey. Or as I started this conversation, whatever young point guard is out there right now until
Mhm.
that need is addressed. Not to repeat myself, but it really is when you think about this in like a logical sense it kind of is a roundabout way that just leads you back to this. I mean, I wouldn't if there was a trade announced that we did. Let's just say, for the sake of conversation, Ethan, we do that trade. Honestly, I'm actually not going to be that mad. I mean, like I really like Garland. I think he could. I mean, I'm not saying he's a perfect player, but I think he would definitely give us shooting and scoring, and that would be a fun pick and roll to watch.
Mhm.
Um, and as much as he still has some defensive deficiencies, I mean, he's still 24. I think the Spurs could definitely, kind of unlock some things there.
Mhm.
Um, but I just really don't feel like it's likely, especially with us getting 4 and 8 in the lottery.
Right. Agreed. And the last point I'll make on this Garland thing, like I like him. Like I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of people in the comments saying that he's a really solid player, and that he played well next to Victor Wembanyama. Probably all true, but I feel like a trade for Garland, like this kind of move, should be the last move the Spurs make on their quest for a championship. Like,
Right.
I'd rather make other smaller moves, continue to build through the draft, and then that's the last thing that we do, maybe either during an offseason or at the deadline. And that's what would propel us forward. Because I don't think Darius Garland's a game changer. I don't think he propels us from bottom of the West
Right.
at 7 or 6, even. I think we're still, even with Garland, and let's say this team
We're
fully,
fringe playing.
yeah, we're fringe playing exactly. So continue to build, get into the playoffs. Then we talk about making a move like this, where we bring in like a borderline all-star point guard or whatever that hole is that's left in our team to kind of push us over the hump. Kind of like how Aaron Gordon was able to help Denver, or Mike Conley was able to help Minnesota's a bad example, but where did he go before that? Utah kind of propelled them past that first round of the playoffs. Similar moves to that.
Yeah, and Kirk confirmed for us here. He said he looked it up. Looks like it was rival executive sourcing that Garland may potentially leave, not his camp. So he says, never mind on the demanding a trade for now. But still, I mean, if other league execs are talking about it, they're obviously hearing something. But here's another thing about Garland, and I think MEZ does make a good point here. Garland is making 36 million, 39 million, 42 million, and 44 million over the length of his contract. And I know that the salary cap's going to keep going up, but like, do we want to commit to that with Darius Garland as of right now, where the Spurs are at in their situation, especially when the giantest contract in NBA history does await us in the horizon with Victor?
Right, right. If you're going to make a move for a big contract, especially with, like you said, Victor and other players kind of coming up, you want that to be front loaded so we have that cap space later to give to those other guys.
Keldon.
Exactly like Keldon. I think Devins was somewhat front loaded, right? Am I
I'd
mistaken?
have to go check that one. Not in the same sense that
Right.
Keldon's is though.
Shout out Keldon. I mean, I know people always talk about trading him, but he's got one of the most friendly contracts like in the NBA for real. So shout out to him.
Definitely. Definitely, Ethan. And the last point I'll make on this, and I know that I'm not trying to get into a whole draft discussion. If you want to dive in to our thoughts on Rob Dillingham, we've put out multiple videos on it. So definitely go check that out. We're not going to go through all that. But like, how different is if Rob Dillingham reaches his peak, how different is he from Darius Garland? Like, you can make the argument that Garland's bigger, better defender, sure, but like offensively,
Yeah.
and then you have him on a rookie deal, like.
You're not wrong. I think that there's absolutely an argument to be made for that. Like if we can take him, let's say he falls to 8, we draft him at 8, and we just play out his future. If everything works out great and he is the next Darius Garland type player, perfect. We're happy we didn't make the trade. If he's not, he still has potential
Right.
to be a trade asset. We can move down the line. Like it's not that big a deal.
Yeah, it goes back to the Kevin O'Connor video that I've referenced a couple times, where he said if he was the Spurs, he would rather draft a player like Rob Dillingham than go after a Trey Young this offseason.
Right.
Um, there's a lot of different perspectives on that. I don't think Ethan or I would come on here and be like, no, this is terrible if the Spurs traded for Trey Young. But if we're being objective and just looking at the reality of where the Spurs are at right now, um, and especially when you have those 2 lottery picks, man, like now that we're a couple weeks removed, like that really does, like, because if we're probably sitting here talking about this conversation a little bit differently if Toronto
Right.
ends up getting their pick.
I was thinking the same thing. Having 2 top 10, top 8 draft picks lessens the need or the desire for us to make a big move like this to kind of fill the gap because we have 2 bites at the apple to kind of fill in both of our biggest holes, which is a playmaking, explosive point guard to pair next to Wemby, and then a better wing uh, to kind of alleviate the fact that Julian Champagny is our starting small forward right now.
Absolutely, Ethan. And that's really been the theme that we've been talking about since the offseason. That and then, the backup center position. Those are really the 3 key things that stand out for the Spurs roster
Mhm.
wise right now.
Agreed.